I can see why father committed suicide. I write to you as a man on the verge of knowledge. Neither is it the kind of enlightenment that leads to positive personal advancement. The unfavorable kind. The kind where you understand destiny has set you on a path to confront more terrible days than anyone could possibly imagine. Based on what I've just read about father's notes in his study, I feel things were fairly similar. This, I suppose, is why he took the decision that resulted in all of the solemn visits comforting mother below. I'd always wanted to be in his study, watching what he did when the rest of us were gone. I simply never imagined it would be because he chose to terminate his life. I doubt there was ever a different setting before I discovered what he did for a job. Many of the peculiarities I recall from my adolescence no longer seem so unusual. Why was it that I was never allowed to use pencils, watercolors, crayons, or chalk? Why weren't there any pictures or paintings in the Manors corridors? Why weren't there any art classes in my strict homeschool curriculum? Why would I win the belt if I started scribbling absent-mindedly while honing my handwriting? My childhood was spent wondering why. I've been in father's study for a few hours now. Despite my wishes, I feel I have discovered my whys. The first was included in the letter. He'd left it on the desk with the light turned on, so that when I stepped into the once forbidden chamber for the first time, I'd notice it right away. Charles, I gave Winston broad instructions to give you the study keys when you arrive. But since he has been my servant for so long, I think he understands the importance of my request. I think that my death will come as a surprise, and to suggest that it isn't sad would be dishonest, but there are no other options. I can only offer common wisdom, and you will realize that I have not been totally honest with you regarding our ancestry. I'm leaving this letter as a parting command. I have a lockbox in my drawer with all the knowledge you'll need for the next few years. And I hope what you find inside doesn't break you the way it broke me. Charles, I trust you understand me well enough not to confuse the vice of pride with a lack of sentiment. I am not an excuse maker. Dad, I'm not going to go through the emotional analysis. My father had left no explanations behind, having left this world on his own terms. Our partnership was never easy, but only the most cruel men could stay unmoved under these situations. But I'm not writing to tell you about the 30 minutes I spent crying into his desk. My revelation is far from fatherly. It's all because of what father had in that terrible box. The unlocked box itself was unremarkable, something along the lines of the length, width, and depth of a cereal box made of beaten aluminum. I forced myself to calm down after this understanding. I wondered whether father had discovered Winston's stockpile of Lucky Charms Winston had kept for me. And then I understood that the forbidden Saturday morning pleasure could only have come from him in such an orderly home as father's. It was unmarked save for a family history sticker that appeared to have been manufactured with the label maker in the same desk drawer. Inside the box, 2 novels were discovered buried beneath some pens and a notebook. One was a sketchbook, and the other was a large scrapbook with a tea-stained cardboard cover and damaged corners. This vast collection of blueprints, letters, articles, and photographs is what sparked my current existential crisis. However, I did not open this book at first. No, I decided to start with the sketchbook, which was bound in purple velvet. Based on the letter placed on the inner cover, I knew who owned it. Dad. My God, all of it is true. Winston, if you're reading this because something happened, please take care of Carol and Charles. The ink on the message had faded and became dim. I knew it had to be many years old because I had never heard father refer to me as anything other than the boy when I was being reared by his manservant. But there isn't time to ponder that. My father's artwork captivated me far more than any phrase or letter arrangement. Paintings, artwork, illustrations, and sketches are all examples of artwork. All of them were forbidden by my father. Nothing was more sacrilegious in his family than creating anything remotely creative. Nonetheless, I possessed pages and pages of his own works. Complex, detailed, and intriguing, but not in a good manner. No, father's photographs had the kind of captivating quality that would drive people to wake up in the middle of the night, sweating profusely and screaming for years to come. The first was a drawing of a figure with lips for eyes. Macabre and dark, but not much more than the consequence of a deranged mind, in my opinion. According to a small note he put in the corner, the name of the terrifying Geiger-like creature who haunted father's nightmares was Zara Sashel. He'd most likely drawn it in biro using the same ballpoint pen he kept in the lockbox. The portrayal was so lifelike that it could have been mistaken for a photograph. My initial reaction was one of appreciation rather than dread. But after reading the note from my father's past buried under the cover, I began to feel ill as I flipped through the pages. My God, all of it is true. When combined with those phrases, the more terrible visuals went from strange to terrifying. Father's expertise grew alongside the perfection of that first faded sketch. As I read through years' worth of pages, I pondered how his works could get any more real and defined with the photorealistic quantity of the tooth-eyed man on page 1. 10 pages in, Father discovered a 2-page spread diagram of a creature he had identified as Thyrtherothax. He'd shown the huge creature with 8 legs stamping on a man 1/100th its size. It was impossible to describe the detail's lifelike quality through words alone. I could almost feel the tiny folds and wrinkles of the beast's worm-like back vibrating beneath my gaze as its invertebrate flesh shone and gleamed in the light. My breath froze in my throat when I first saw Father's depiction of those lifeless, glassy eyes, the human baby's face the size of a wrecking ball, and, most importantly, the bus-sized maggot's body that he had dragging into the pitch-black depths behind it. All of it is true, God. The Father had moved on from his hideous creations, such as Zarasashael with mouth-open eyes and Thyrtherothax after 100 pages. By the middle of the pad, Father had transformed, and he was now sketching enormous, terrifying landscapes. Scenes that are so vivid that prolonged looking may produce dizziness. My stomach would lurch, a rushing, tingling sensation rising beneath my skin as if my body thought it might collapse into those fictitious worlds that my rigid, unimaginative father had doodled in ballpoint on the paper. One was a world of jagged, spiraling mountains, jammed into a tiny region beneath a starless sky, a range resembling drill-like Everests fighting for position above chasms so deep that a falling man would drop far below to the Earth's core. I could see objects in the distance behind and between the twisted rock pillars that protruded like hair from each hill. The towering, slathering creatures resembled square slugs with fangs, and Father most certainly measured each of the 12 1mm by 1mm white segments using a ruler and compass. The longer I stared, the more I noticed the people in the distance. I had to tell myself that having people in an artwork emerge from their caves and glance back at you was not possible, almost as astonishing as the realization that, despite my father's monochromatic drawings, their brilliantly depicted extraterrestrial sun was both blue and orange at the same time. One of his other forays into unfriendly territory that piqued my interest was the island in the blue desert known as the Heart of Gearthurks. I'm not sure how I knew this time, but I did. Those black ink sands had turned blue. This is supported by the vivid memories I get when recalling it. I mistook the undulating blue hills for an ocean at first, but then I realized Father had purposely chosen to shade them with a granular texture. I'll never know how he found the patience or the time to recognize all those trillions of grains. This essay, however, was not primarily about the dunes. Father was likely inspired by the island the size of a continent that floated over the dune lands. He had a vivid mental image of it, complete with shimmering flesh-carved rocks marching across its surface and a figure seated on a shadowy throne at the pinnacle of a gigantic pillar of human corpses. My father was not a particularly inventive man. His universe revolved on numbers, figures, and transactions. That's why the solid ink cloud around the throne and the figure I knew was waiting inside it were even more terrifying. All of it is true. I hurled the sketchbook across the room and cursed everyone I knew because I was so furious with the last few dozen pages. When these were shown, there was little recognition for artistic ability. My only emotion, other from a perspiration-filled face, was pity, though it was momentary. Based on how fresh the ink was, the final sketches, done in the final years before Father chose to take a bath using a toaster and meters of extension cord, stood as a witness to the lunacy he had undergone in silence. For the first time in decades, I began to feel sorrow for the decades I'd pushed myself to live away from the family home. But my regret was fleeting. Father had clearly spent more time up here with his drawings during my years away from home, as I now understood. The latter fourth of the book was taken up by a single image that took up 4.5 large pages. The attention to detail was astounding. Because he had put in so much effort, I couldn't envision him finishing it in less than 2 years. I doubt any other artist would have realized those pen strokes were part of a multi-page portrait. But Papa was no ordinary artist. However, I couldn't tell you how I knew it was a vision of a being. There was no structure to it. I immediately recognized that Father had maintained this image for pages and pages, because whatever this abyssal creature was, it was so massive that measuring form in the way we know it would be impossible. The only logical feature the human mind could comprehend in Father's description of this creature was the presence of eyeballs. He'd drawn them on several pages, a gigantic dead object the size of entire solar systems, that was solely composed of star-sized eyes and stellar gases. However, there was no body present. Father had darkened the spaces between those millions of eyeballs using permanent markers. Any visions of an undiscovered celestial anatomy lurking beneath those dense black plumes are figments of my imagination, a mental trick. They have to be, At least, that's what I tell myself. Father's artwork concerned me because it expressed more than paper and a ballpoint pen could ever aspire to. However, the final image, which Father had recognized as Hara, was completely perplexing. It was aggravating. As soon as the eyes began to blink back at me, I threw the book from my grasp. I can feel their gaze on me even though the book is closed and in the corner of the room. I'm still trying to persuade myself not to do it. Images are motionless, and they almost never return your gaze. But wait until you hear from Dad. It is true. It hit me as I was flipping through the second book Dad had left me. When I'd gathered my thoughts, I placed the tea-stained scrapbook in front of me. I opened it to the first page with one hand while holding a pen and notepad in the other. I was well versed in the history of my mother's family. Mother comes from a wealthy family of financiers and merchants, with ancestors dating back to the Habsburgs. My father's family, on the other hand, had always been kept hidden. As a result, as soon as I saw the name Stuart Bramfield, I knew I had to start taking notes. Even at that time, I realized there would be a lot of emotional work to be done. I had no idea how many of those unresolved emotions would be terrifying. I recognized the gloomy man from the newspaper clipping right away. My father's father was the only one with that narrow face and wrinkled brow. Stuart Bramfield was my long-lost paternal grandfather. I wish he and many before him had never been discovered. I would have preferred if they had remained missing. In the image, he was standing beside a painting. I shivered when I viewed the photo, even though it was hazy owing to 1940s camera quality and had faded over time. It was the mouth-eyed Zara from the first page of Father's sketchbook, the character I'd assumed he'd sketched himself. The fact that my grandfather's painting was so close to the sketch, and that the painting was much more defined in the photo than it was in the painter concerned me much about his interpretation. Nothing in the title helped to alleviate my nerves. Hysteria in the masses after the late Bramfield auction. The entire piece had been inserted by Father. Stuart Bramfield, my grandfather, was a well-known painter. After his death in 1939, the year Father was born, his unsold pieces were auctioned off to a group of wealthy fans. Every single piece was gone. The phrase mass hysteria in the title relates to the fact that all 108 guests, including the auctioneer, had committed themselves by the next morning, but not before pulling out their own eyeballs. I fixed my focus on the portrait of the man with an open mouth that hung behind my grandfather. There was widespread panic. The portrait stared back at me through the picture, daring me to accept the flimsy reason. My God, all of it is true. Articles about Stuart Bramfield's father, my great-grandfather Lionel Bramfield, eventually gained precedence over his adventures and his gravity-defying paintings. Despite being the more macabre-inclined wealthy elite's quasi-celebrity idol, Lionel Bramfield did not receive the same appreciation for his gifts as Stuart did. No, Lionel's only contribution to my life, according to a letter I received from my great-grandmother, was a long and agonizing death in an asylum 10 years after grandfather's birth in 1890. Carolina Boxted's letter, dated 1898, is stated to read, "Lionel, this is the final letter you will ever receive. You continue to write to me despite my requests, and I have never read them or told little Stuart the truth about you. I've moved on and made up with another man, a widower with business interests in England. It's a convenient arrangement, and Stuart and I will be sailing for Plymouth by the end of the week. I've left no instructions with the asylum on how to contact us. Even if you recover, don't come looking for us. I implore you, Lionel Bramfield, to lay down those brushes. Those paintings contain the devil, and you enabled him to channel himself into them through your hand. I can never forgive you for that. I can't close my eyes without seeing the females. Rosalind didn't ask to walk into your workshop and witness that terrible mural. You know I puked twice when I saw it, so I don't hold it against her, and I pray her spirit rests. I should never have let you talk me out of burning it. She was simply a maid, a commoner with no education to comprehend what she witnessed. So how could I hold her accountable for her actions or lunacy when it was your fault in the first place? There is no curse, only darkness in your spirit and the paints and brushes you use to release it. It doesn't matter to me anymore, but I hope you realize that one day. Stuart is all that's left of me, Lionel, and my love for you died that day, along with the girls and Rosalind. Please do not try to find us. Boxted, North Carolina." On the next page, Father has an attachment with a newspaper clipping detailing the heinous incident. It occurred in 1891. The maid of an upscale Wisconsin household appears to have gone wild, murdering the landowner's 3 tiny girls before hanging herself. Following that, a warrant of admission from the St. Dionysius Asylum for the irreversibly mad was issued. Other than Carolina Nee Boxted, it appears that other people were disturbed by Lionel's paintings. Lionel had been hauled to St. Dionysius's by the Boxted guys after she had brought them to her brothers. Nonetheless, not before each of them had lost an ear and a few fingers. Although there were no samples of Lionel's work, the images of his son's exhibits and my father's paintings helped me visualize the tragedies that drove Rosalind the maid to murder 3 helpless children before killing herself. God, all of it is true. The next ancestor father uncovered was Marcus Bramfield, who I believe was Lionel's father. The only clippings beneath it were ancient sepia tinplate images that gave no indication of how father knew this man's name. The smiling homesteader in the log house and forest, on the other hand, was instantly recognizable as a member of my family. He had the pointed chin and gaunt features that appeared to characterize all Bramfield men. In each image, Marcus was seen beaming heartily in front of a painting. Each of them made my stomach clench 1,000 times tighter than the last. Thurtherathax, the infantile-appearing maggot thing from father's nightmares, was among them. According to Marcus's description, the creature was capturing entire horses with its bird-like skeletal arms and swallowing them whole. Another was a large painting of a faceless girl with her jaw, brow, scalp, and nose all removed to reveal gore so realistic that I thought drops of dewy cheeks had dropped off her dewy cheeks as I turned away. The last of the dozen or so tin plates showed a landscape with a blazing pyre. When I first saw that page, I roared at the insane faces of the madmen dancing around it. Every time I looked at that sepia square, their blazing eyes appeared to pop out of the frame, and I could nearly smell the smoke. The worst part was that I had to persuade myself after a few minutes that I wasn't hearing the weeping of the youngster who was fastened to a pole above the flames. Every artwork by Marcus Bramfield sickened me more than I could have imagined. In terms of detail, realism, and photo-like quality, they equaled father's sketches. It didn't help that their painter was overjoyed. My stomach felt nauseous. Too many of those tinplate horrors rang true for me. I'd seen them in Dad's sketchbook. Father was clearly not a creative person, but the paints on the tinplate images were simply too little to recreate with such precision and attention to detail. It made no sense. All of it is true. It was the final page that gave me my epiphany. A note, an ancient rumpled pencil message that predated both Marcus's scary paintings and the sepia images of him. "You're my sweetheart. You understand that I have to leave you. We shouldn't have upset the woodland creatures. I drew their attention, so I should lead them on out. I don't want either of you or the boy to suffer. Since touching that dreadful orange-blue light, all I've been able to see are the same horrors and nightgasts the youngster draws, and he's begun to see similar visions as well. I'm not sure how they got him, but the item said we'd be conduits or whatever the term is for all the Bramfield men. You saw what they did to the Injuns in the valley over a blasted totem. What will they do when they see? I don't know, my darling. All I know is that I have to stop these wicked visions. I can't have the boy growing up to be some kind of freak. I went back for that light to see if I could find those damn things and get them to lift this curse, but they were gone. There are tracks leading into the forest, though, and I'm going to start there because I have to start somewhere. Look, I'm going to fix this, even if it takes forever. I can whittle them as if they were standing right in front of me. Far more lifelike and better than anything I've ever carved. You know, I've never been any damn good at it. There are things out there, my love. I've seen them, and I see them every night when I close my eyes. But don't worry. No matter what I discover, I'll follow them down and kill every last cretin until they repair our blasted sun. I can't go until I figure this out. If I don't return, please live your life. A dead man can't fill your heart. It's too big. Forever. Yours, Obadiah. Father's admonition rang loud and clear as I closed the book. It is simply not conceivable. In the world, there were no curses. Clearly, the guys in my family had inherited schizophrenia. That's exactly what it had to be. Wasn't that the only possible explanation? When I went to look at the notes I thought I'd been taking while reading, I yelled. The notepad I'd been using had no notes in it. Every page I can recollect filling with ideas and concerns regarding my tangled paternal heritage was wordless. Despite what I remembered, my hand had not been writing. It had been drawing. I went over the images my ink-stained hand had created, swearing incessantly and repeating every swear word I knew. They were all formed of eyes, the same eyes that Father had spent the last few months of his life painting by hand. The same eyes that screamed and then blinked back. The downstairs wake has come to an end. Mother or Winston will undoubtedly pay me a visit shortly to see how I'm doing. Thank heavens for the size of the estate. I suppose it's the only way no one heard me scream and cry, smash glass, or bang, until my guilty palm cracked on the desk. I'm not sure how I'm going to explain this to them. They'll think I'm nuts, that my breakdown is similar to Father's, and they'll lock me up like Lionel Bramfield to protect me from my own insanity and the insanity that lurks in my DNA. But I don't believe it's insane. The notebook remains in the same place, staring back at me from the ground, its eyes blinking. I'll show them what I mean. They won't trust me unless I have to. All I can hope for is that they're tougher than Lionel's maid. I'm at a loss on what to do. My hand will heal one day, but when will that be? Those drawings remain there despite the fact that I don't recall doing them. My thoughts are racing, and they are more vivid and visual than they have ever been. When I close my eyes, my dreams come in waves. An actual Bramfield curse exists. It's impossible to avoid. This is my realization. I can see why Father committed suicide.